Welcome to the Whiskey Wednesday show, Mr. Noah Mintz. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so happy to have Noah on the show today. Not only is an old friend and musician who I met back in I'm thinking it would have been, we're head in the 90s, 91 area, or were you guys on before?
Right. Well, it would have been right when you joined The Watchmen. Right
Okay, so that was about the time. Because I remember the years before that, the Morganfields were kicking around, and some of those other bands, but you weren't yet part of that, right?
Well, we played with them. So we started in 91, but we didn't really get going until about 92.
Right.
It was like, but we played with the Morganfields all the time. Like, those guys are great. And, it's still going in a way, right? So,
well, Alan's still doing it. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Alan. I think he's one of Canada's underrated gems.
Yeah, exactly.
And Head were a part of the early sort of, were you guys part of the grunge scene?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We started because of it, basically. Like,
okay, that's what I thought. I
we
just didn't want to
heavily influenced by it.
Yeah, and you guys were an amazing band for how many years?
From 91 till 97. And when I quit the band, I ended the band.
Yeah.
That was my first week of being a mastering engineer. So it was like, I was like ready to move on,
And I figured that. And once, of course, you get into mastering, the idea of being in the loud clubs, playing at 120 decibels and destroying your ears becomes very counterintuitive to mastering, correct?
Yeah. And I still don't really go see live music because of it. So
yeah. Most of the people that I know who are ear precious, mastering and professional mixers, they have a really hard time with live music because of the volume.
Mm-hmm. Like, I'll go to like Massey Hall or whatever, but not, where they have a different thing. Pretty strict.
Yeah.
But if you go to the Rivoli, you're like, you walk out of there and you basically have like temporary tinnitus. Tinnitus. Yeah.
Temporary tinnitus.
Tinnitus, yes.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like some of those nice rooms. I mean, a place like Massey Hall. I mean, I think when you're in your seat, they have such good production and sound that no matter where you're sitting, it's probably not breaking 85 or 90 dB. Really.
No.
You go to a club show and you're up front. I mean, you can be hitting 105 dB without even knowing it, and that's what gets to be really damaging.
Especially places like Horseshoe, where they it sounds so good there, but they crank it up like it's loud.
Yeah, it's stadium volume in a 500 seat room. Yeah, which is great, but it's not good for your ears.
No.
So let's speak a little bit about mastering. Okay, so
sure.
When I started doing music, I had to learn all the parts of it. The recording, mixing, mastering. And there was a time when that wasn't actually an issue because everything was recorded by a horn, and it was recorded to a lathe, and that was then used to duplicate things.
Mm-hmm.
And then when tape and stuff started coming in, they needed to find a way to transfer the process, transfer the recorded audio to different mediums like vinyl and stuff like that. And I think, if I'm correct, and you can bring in the history however you know it, but in my idea, it was sort of part of the industry standardization of volume level, so that things sounded the same. Recorded things sounded the same when you went from one recording to another, and especially radio.
Mm-hmm.
That's changed intensely in the last 50 years. And nowadays, it's gone to the point where we have AI and stuff like Lander doing mastering for people.
Mm-hmm.
I've always said, and I still maintain, that a real mastering engineer is kind of dabbling in the dark arts of music because it's something that most people have very little understanding of.
Mm-hmm.
You want to give me a little breakdown on what mastering is and why it's important for artists to actually get things mastered professionally?
Sure, yeah. And I'll start with what you were talking about, and I'll unpack that a little bit as briefly as possible. Basically, mastering started with just people in a room transferring from whatever the medium was to the distributed medium, like the vinyl master, and then Doug Sachs and other people like that came along and said, well, if we compress things, if we EQ them, we can make them a little louder, we can make them a little more consistent. And then creative mastering sort of started in the late 50s, early 60s. And then as time went along, they kind of realized that a louder master gets played more on the radio, so they got more pressure to get things louder. And then, in the 80s and 90s, tools came along that were specific for mastering. And And then I think along the 90s and the 2000s, mastering was pretty much keeping, like, was still album based, and it was making it so songs sound consistent on an album. People were still listening from song 1 to song 10, and you wanted a consistent level, and still trying to make it as loud as possible. And it got to a point where maybe it was perhaps too loud. But somewhere along the way, things kind of changed. And you mentioned the AI thing, and you mentioned the dark arts, and they're actually kind of related, because mastering engineers have typically been very secretive in what they do. And so that allowed all these like companies to come in, especially the so-called AI companies come in and say, well, we do mastering, because people don't really know what mastering is, because they've been so secretive about what mastering is. People thought, well, this is mastering, but it's not really AI mastering. It's more algorithmic mastering. It would be like the same thing using my experience to master something without actually hearing it. If I just sort of looked at it and just sort of looked at the frequencies, looked at the levels, and just sort of did my thing, I'd probably get fairly close without actually having to hear it. And that's kind of what the AI stuff is. That's why it either gets it or completely doesn't get it. There's no kind of middle ground with it. When the algorithm works, it works, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. So then past AI, what we've gotten to is more like YouTube mastering. And that's a sense of like the YouTube guys coming up and explaining mastering. And you can watch 20 different mastering videos, and they all say mastering is something different, because they're all trying to create new content. But you know what the secret to mastering is? The funny thing is that why they've been so secretive about mastering all these years, and I'm going to break this down for you, is because mastering is really, really simple. I like to say that I could take one day and teach you how to master, but it's going to take you 5 years to get any good at it, like to really understand all the nuances that it comes to. And I was lucky because I started at a time that all the stuff I worked on the first few years was really like simple stuff. Like I was working for a CD manufacturing company. I was just leveling things. I got to ease my way into it before I got to do really serious projects. But now, more or less, because there's so many variables now, I would say the modern mastering is trying to make it sound as good on as many playback systems as possible, because there are so many, for everything from a large club to a great hi-fi system, all the way down to a single Bluetooth speaker. And don't forget, those are usually mono. So you needed the technical knowledge to make sure it sounds good in mono and sounds good in stereo. So sometimes when you get something called a reference master, meaning the mix person has done a master for the artist, sometimes the artist will come back and listen to what I've done and go, but the reference master sounds so much louder and hypier. And then I usually say, okay, I understand that completely. However, take what I did, play it on a single Bluetooth speaker, and take what they did, play it on a single Bluetooth speaker, and tell me what sounds better. And almost always they're like, yeah, for some reason yours just sounds a little more natural. And I'm like, yeah, because I didn't hype it. I didn't go as loud as that. I sort of fixed the phase a little bit. I fixed the bass a little bit. So it's going to sound more consistent all the way through. The hyped master may sound better on your iPhone, or may sound better on your home stereo or your car, but it's not going to sound better on everything. So you kind of have to take that lowest common denominator. Plus, it's got to sound good on Spotify, YouTube, all those different formats that you only really get one upload for. When you upload your master, it goes, your distribution company distributes it to everything, the same master. It's got to sound good on everything. And then, of course, you need a vinyl master, which will be different. So having the experience to make a proper vinyl master, of course, we've been doing vinyl mastering in-house for 50 years almost.
Well, that's been a huge part of your machine over there.
So having a vinyl master is really important to having a good vinyl. Now, it's not always important to have a good vinyl, because a lot of the people who buy your records don't actually have a record player, but it's you want a good sounding record. Like, it's just like, why have a compromised sounding record, even though most people maybe don't even listen to it, or know the difference. Just, you want to be able to put on like I was listening to the White album this morning, and I haven't listened to it in couple years, and I'm like, gosh, this sounds so good.
Mm-hmm.
And then you want to be able to put your album on after and go, oh, at least compete on a record level, like level wise
Yep.
and distortion wise with the White Album. Sound is, maybe not as good, but comparable perhaps.
It's really interesting, and that's something that I talk to a lot of people about. They're like, well, can't I just sort of put it through like a compressor and kind of put a limiting on it, and it'll work on everything? And there's especially when you start doing vinyl, vinyl is based on, so many different things: the depth of the groove, how much bass you want in it, how loud you want the record. If it's a bass heavy, loud record, and you go beyond 16 minutes or so, you're going to start losing. You start putting 22 minutes on a side, it gets quieter because the grooves are not as deep, and all these things have to be taken into consideration by a person like you.
Yeah.
You're working in a mastering house that does lacquers for records, and actually you guys are doing vinyl as well now these days, right? You're doing the whole package.
Well, we work with Microform, and we broker the actual pressing itself, because we don't do the pressing, but we do the cutting. So
you do everything else right up to it, and then send them the product to press.
Yeah, and we take care of we take your money, and we get you the albums and all that stuff. We just take care of the whole process.
Yeah,
it just makes it so we can control the QC all the way through.
Well, and I think that's an important thing, because a lot of people who do get their album done, and they go, oh, it sounds great in my car, it sounds great on my phone, I'm going to go do vinyl now, and then they just send their files to a random vinyl place. And
here's a great example, actually, just an album yesterday that the label went directly to the manufacturer to get the pressing done, didn't come to us for the cutting, something we mastered, and it was cut in I probably shouldn't say names, but it was cut somewhere in Canada by someone who's fairly new at it. And we've had problems before. And the artist was like, I cannot believe how incredibly terrible this sounds. So we looked at something called the dead wax, and that's where there's a little etching in your record. And it says who cut it. And I was like, does it say this? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, that's that guy. That's that guy who doesn't know what he's doing right now. And unfortunately, because he's cheap, a couple manufacturers are going to him, and he'll get good eventually, but right now he's no good, frankly. Yeah. And I've had 3 records rejected because this guy cut it. So now our guy's cutting it, has to recut, go through the whole process again, because it just doesn't sound any good. So having a cutter who actually cares makes all the difference for a good sounding record.
Well, yeah, and I've experienced different degrees of that too with different projects I've been involved with, and you're absolutely right. And that is why I do try and direct people your way. I mean, I think that you are one of the best in Canada. Just from knowing you and working with you and hearing stories about jobs you've done with other people. I mean, it's a very fantastic service you're offering.
Yeah, but also, there's also we work with Microform a lot because they use lacquer pretty much exclusively. But there's Precision, who do direct metal mastering in Prague. So that's a whole different process. But those guys have tons of experience too, and they use a computer to do the cutting. So sometimes you can get almost a better cut than a human can do because they have it. But sometimes it doesn't work out so well because it needs that sort of human touch, even though there's a human operating it. But so you get those two different. So depending on the whole old 70s and 80s debate of whether you do a lacquer or a direct metal master debate has come right back, because right here in Ontario we have that option of doing a direct metal master or a lacquer.
Right.
So we're kind of spoiled that way because most places don't have both methods of cutting and resulting pressing from it. So, but they're both good in their own ways.
And the new digital pressing, has that come along enough to a point where it's something to consider?
It's actually been abandoned as far as I know. It was called HD vinyl.
Yeah.
And I believe it's been abandoned. They couldn't figure it out. It still needs to be done manually. Even the direct metal masters is a computer is making the decisions, but the cut is still a manual cut.
Right. Yeah, you need those eyes and ears on. I believe it's such a finicky process. A
laser can't do
lacquer, right?
A laser can't do what a sapphire or diamond can do. That's
exactly
just the way it is. It's crazy. It's crazy to think about it, that they can't get that precision that a physical device can do. It's really incredible.
Yeah, well, that's yeah.
It's
I
a
don't know.
perfected
I don't
medium.
know the science of it, but one works and one doesn't, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's, you think about it, the best explanation I have is that it's just like a speaker or a microphone, and it's the way it's cutting is exactly the same way your speaker goes up and down.
Yeah,
It's like there's just a little more back and forth, but it's like it's physics, and it's like, and it blows my mind. I don't fully understand a record. I understand a CD. I don't understand a record. It blows, and the more I learn about it, the more I'm even more confused about it. It's a miracle of science that's so old now, like 100
yeah.
years old plus, and yet it's still state of the art. It's
I know,
incredible.
it's amazing, and I don't know. I'm not going to get into a whole sort of rage on why vinyl is so good. People have heard me talk about that for too long. I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
vinyl. I love the sound of it. I love the feel of it. I love the 16 to 20 minutes per side. It's good when I'm cooking. I can time things with it. Like there's so many values to a physical product.
Honestly, and I've recently got into because I'm doing a lot of vinyl to vinyl transfers. Like we get vinyl records in. That's the only master they have available.
Oh,
And so I transferred onto digital and then back to vinyl. And so I've been getting into cartridges recently. And
yeah,
that is a crazy black hole. Like you can go up to tens of thousands of
yeah,
dollars for a cartridge.
yeah. I
So
think the
I stick more
standard
to the
company
three,
now
four
is
hundred dollars.
what was it?
But
OMCROM or something? What's the name of the company that's sort of the
oh,
standard
oh,
now?
yeah, yeah,
They've taken
yeah,
over for Stanton and all those people.
yeah, yeah. Uh, I know what you're talking about. My brain is. I have one at home.
Yeah, I just got one, and it's as good as my old. I used to when I was DJing back in the late '90s. I still can't believe I
Ortofon,
actually did that.
Ortofon,
I what's that?
Ortofon.
Ortofon, that's it.
Yeah,
I used to use the Stantons, and of course, you can't get replacement needles for the styluses anymore. They've just
no,
changed the diameter of the insert a
yeah.
little bit so it doesn't fit. So I had to get a new whole head, and yeah, the Omicron one is just they're great. They're really really nice. But yeah,
Ortofon.
I gotta
Yeah,
spend
we
a couple hundred
you
bucks
get a
on one.
gold, blue, or a red. So I just got the blue one. It's pretty amazing.
I think mine is red. I can't remember.
Yeah, the red one. It's a couple
But
hundred bucks.
yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was fine. It's great.
Great.
I'm really happy with it. Um, so for people who aren't doing vinyl,
Yeah,
I'm still getting the same argument when I talk to them and say, spend the money on mastering. They're like, well, why am I going to spend the money on mastering? I can put it into Lander,
yeah,
or I can use one of the AI generators, and it brings it up to
yeah.
the same volume as everything else. So then when I send it out, people are only listening on their phones anyways. What's your answer to that argument?
Simple for me. So I have two answers. One, because specifically for me and other people like me, because I have all this gear here.
Hmm.
So to me, analog is such an important stage in the digital world. Mastering just to run through one piece of gear, like if you've seen my Instagram recently, I got that Decca compressor, and
Just saw that. Yeah.
it has a switch just to go through it, no compression, just to go through it and get the sound of it. And a project I'm doing for mastering right now, I'm going through just my stereo Pultec, like just through it, and that je ne sais quoi of what a transformer and tubes is doing adds something. And I have a lot of gear, and I have a lot of gear because I believe in the esoteric sound and the ephemeral sound that it provides, something that no software can do.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing, to set the sort of overall tone of the album and make it sort of reach out emotionally to people. And I think mastering is very important for that. But the other thing why professional mastering is so important is an answer that might surprise you, but it's because sometimes we do almost nothing, and we have the confidence to be able to say, oh, this just needs one little bit of EQ. This just needs like to go through a tiny bit of compression. This just needs to go through one piece of gear and nothing else, or just the littlest things, or sometimes nothing. If I do nothing to an album, it takes me 8 to 10 hours to figure out that nothing was the best thing to do. But then no one else would do that. No, Lander wouldn't do that. Lander would never do nothing. It's always
Yeah.
got to do something. Otherwise, no one would pay for it. So, and I'm not saying nothing is ever the case. I mean, it's very rare. I did a Sophie Millman album, that I did nothing to. And
Mhm.
I think I won a Juno, and it was like, and you know what it's like, people are like, well, you know, why do you take credit for that if you didn't do anything? I go, because it took me 2 days, it took me 2 full days to figure out that nothing was all that needed to get done to it. But then sometimes just doing the most minimal stuff, and like with all this gear and all these plugins, you know, there's thousands of plugins. And just to say this only needs a limiter and nothing else. And that's the
Yeah.
right thing to do. And sometimes it takes feedback to do that. Sometimes it takes the producer going, I like what you did, but there's just, it just changed it too much, or something you can do. It doesn't keeps it as loud, but doesn't change it. Sometimes you just
Mhm.
EQ it to get a little bit louder, but you EQ it to get it sounding like before it was louder. Like, you have to know whether that's the right thing to do, or be heavy handed, run it through 5 pieces of gear to get like a completely different sound. And then
Right.
the artist will go, oh, this is exactly what I was going for. Like, because
And I guess,
there's no the same. Every time it's different.
well, of course, because it's always, I mean, it can be from a single mic to, I mean, you could have
Mm.
tracks coming in with hundreds of channels of audio going through them, right? Um, I mean, I know for me, sometimes it's just that sort of fresh objective ears, and because I have a history with you too, and I don't know, how much mastering artists do this with other people, but I know that with you and with John Wynot and other people that I've worked
Mm-hmm.
on projects, I've really enjoyed the confidence in sending the track and saying, is this ready for whatever the next step is? Like when I kind of think, like, right, for example, we'll talk about the song that I just sent you this week.
Mm-hmm.
A very basic song, tracked really simply. I'm trying to use very few plugins and effects these days at all. The majority, 85% of my mix is level, gain, and panning. And then EQ and then all this sort of sweetener stuff comes after, in some cases, not even at all anymore. I'm using very little in the way of reverbs and delays and stuff. But I'm also using very little compression, because there's so many, you buy a Pro Tools subscription now, or Logic, or whatever you're using, and you've got everything. You've got your bus compressors, you've got your compressors for your mono tracks, stereo compressors, you've got all these, whatever you need. And I'm finding more and more that the less that I do on that end of things, it gives the mastering person more room to work with. Like, you get a track that's already been limited and bus compressors and all that stuff put on it. Does that kind of handcuff you a little bit, do you find?
I can't undistort something. So all those things, anytime you got a square wave, like a flat waveform, that's distortion. And whether you can hear it or not, it's still distortion.
Right.
And I can't undistort it. I mean, RX will try to, but it's really not, it's always there. So the more room I have to work, and also, like, when you do it the way you're doing it, I'm seeing that vision and I'm trying to do that same thing. And if I decide I need some extra stuff, then great. But it's like, it's really hard to do what you're doing because you have unlimited options. You have the whole history of compressors in front of your face. So why not use them all?
I
It's
know.
like it's no different than when I get in here and I all my gear here. Like, I'm just like, I want to use everything. Like, I want to turn those knobs. That's what's so much fun about it, And it's like, but I got to go, okay, and I can do it. I can put them all in, and then I take it out, and I go,
Yeah.
does that sound just as good with it out? And I'm like, okay, what about I take out the next thing? Does it sound good? And I'm like, oh man, all that hard work, it sounds better if I just take it out, or just as good. Maybe not
Yeah.
necessarily better, but just as good. It just doesn't need it. So it's like, I gotta like listen to it. 90% of what I do is listening.
Yeah.
And so, and I get paid to listen, which is that's why mastering is kind of a racket in a way. It's like, because you're like really most of my work is just listening, not actually doing any work, right? So, or any physical stuff. So, but I'm just trying to get the vision. I'm just trying to like figure out what to do intellectually by just listening to it and getting familiar with it. Like, I if I'm at home, my ex-wife, she used to listen to albums over and over and over again. And it'd drive me crazy, like absolutely crazy. But when I go to work, I can
Hmm.
listen to the same song 100 times and have no problem. But at home, I don't want to hear the same song like within a week, It's like, so it's different personal listening and professional listening. Professional listening, I'm like, I get to know the song intimately, all the lyrics, all the instrumentation as a whole and as a separate thing. Like I just listen to a frequency. Like it's like I hone in on it. I'm really obsessively listening to every single song, and that's so. I forget what the original point was, but that's my method of working. I'm basically just listening and deciding the intention of what you were going for in the first place, and then trying to like make sure I don't push it away from that intention or push it back to the intention where it was kind of lost along the way.
And I think one of the keys to a mastering engineer, and this is something that I also feel like with a producer, I mean, yeah, you know how to turn the knobs. Engineers know how to turn the knobs. Producers know how to turn the knobs. But it's more, when I work with John Wynot and he's producing a track, it's more on what he brings to the track in like his history. He has a history of listening to and being a part of so much music. He can say he gets to understand my vision and then helps me to get it where I want to. Yeah. And that's the production is an important step. But after that, there's another important step, which is mastering. And that's where that, the finished mix where everything is balanced and put in its right place. Now it's got to be brought to a place where it can be, as you said, played on every platform, put into vinyl, all these things. And that's an incredibly important part as well. And, that was part of why I wanted to have you on the show. Because I've had this conversation with so many musicians who just say, well, maybe I don't need to pay for the mastering, and there's also every producer out there now is, offering, well, not every producer, I shouldn't say that, but a lot of producers are offering, yeah, I can do your record for you. And at the end, I'll throw in some mastering on it all at the end.
And frankly, I'm going to throw it a percentage, but frankly, maybe 75% of the time, that's just fine. Nobody would notice a difference. But then there's those albums that if you just care enough about that professional mastering, any person who does mainly mastering it will benefit every time. Plus every single album that you and I know and love over the past 50 years has been mastered. Every single one of them. And what do they know that we don't know? It's like they thought it was important.
Exactly.
And there's a reason why they did mastering. And there's still, obviously it's my job, but I still feel it's really important. But I don't, not so much in the sense that if someone else does it, I'm not saying it's going to be bad. Chances are the engineer or the producer is going to do a fine job. It's just that you don't know if your album is one of those albums that's just going to sound better with real mastering. It's pretty random. It's pretty like, it's just, you'll never know unless you hear it. You can always pay for mastering and go for what the other guy did. Like you tried it. It's not that expensive. Your music's worth it. And it's no shame in saying, hey, and emailing me and saying, hey, I just like what the other guy did better. And I'm like, I get it. I'm happy to keep working on it, but you go with what you feel is best.
Yeah. I think a big thing for me too, back in the days when it was CD or vinyl, that was the choice on how you mastered. And then, iTunes started coming up with things like MFit, like you wanted to get MFit put on your album because it was mastered for iTunes. As an artist, I have enough on my plate writing songs. Most of us are our own engineers and our own producers, people who are doing their own records these days independently. When it comes to that final bit of like, what's happening with the YouTube compression as opposed to Spotify and iTunes and the other 35 distributions that are being offered, I like to be able to put that into somebody's hands rather than do research. And that's partly what I'm paying for too. You are in tune with the current state of audio in the world. And I think that's a really important thing to know.
Yeah, I have a button that I can listen to all those different formats to make sure they don't sound terrible in those formats. You don't really have a lot of control over how it's played back, but you've got the consumer. The consumer doesn't know that they're listening to the lowest quality.
Right.
Like when I go, I've been on dates before and I've been like, can I see your phone? And they're like, why? I go, I want to check your Spotify settings. And I'm like, hey, I just made your Spotify better. And then I always get a message the next day and like, oh my God, I like listening to music again, because they were listening to the lowest quality on Spotify, But now we have Atmos is the new sort of buzzword.
Yeah.
Now, I personally, I don't love listening to Atmos unless I'm in an Atmos studio.
Yes.
In fact, when you listen to it in an Atmos studio, it's mind blowing. But when you listen to it on headphones, it's
Too
like,
much.
wow, stereo is 100 times better than this. I don't get it. I don't get why it's even a format. But
yeah, it was like when they came out with 5-point surround sound and stuff. It's great if you've got 5-point system, but if you're listening to it on headphones, you've only got 2 speakers. Why mix it to 5? And that's kind of the way I feel about the
Atmos goes one step further. Atmos uses psychodynamic, psychoacoustics to fool your brain into thinking it's all around you. So like if you get a chance to listen on Apple Music, listen to some Atmos mixes on your AirPods. You'll know what I mean. Like listen to some of those old albums. You're like, wow, it's just, I mean, some are good, but most are just like, ugh. But then if you get a chance to listen to an Atmos studio, you're like, I listened to Dark Side of the Moon in an Atmos studio a couple nights ago. It was like, whoa, it's amazing. But there was 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17 speakers all around me. That sounded amazing. I'm like, wow, no one will get to hear this. Nobody.
Exactly. That's been my problem with a lot of those fancy things, is that it's just, it's great if you've got the studio, but I don't have it, and I probably won't. One thing that you mentioned that I wanted to mention to our viewers, this is something that changed my world. I bought a set of headphones recently that have a little button on the side, so you can go from stereo to mono. And mixing,
I've never seen that before.
It's amazing.
That's pretty cool.
And what an amazing thing when you're mixing. Because when you're mixing in stereo, things can sound great, but like you said, there's a lot of resources that are still mono. And when you mono some of these things, sometimes you've got things in your stereo field that are actually going to cancel each other out when you put it in mono, and things just disappear and other things appear. So those headphones have been an amazing thing for me. They're nice sounding headphones too, but yeah, just being able to flick the switch and go from mono to stereo is been.
I have that right on my console here. I can listen to mono, and I can actually listen to what's been canceled as well. This is the side.
Yes.
I listen to mono all the time. Like it's like we got to make sure. And then if the mono sounds really different, I consider that a whole new approval process where I go to the client. I say, hey, listen to it in mono, and make sure you're okay with this before you release it. Because if it's so wide that the mono sounds completely different, they have to approve that. Like it has to. And sometimes if it's so wide, you have to tell them this is not going to sound good on vinyl, because it needs to be more mono content for it to sound good, especially bass.
Well, just the low end has to be centered. Yeah,
it has to be. It could be centered, but it could also be hard left or hard right. It just can't be stereo. Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Noah Mintz for coming on the show and talking to us about the dark arts of mastering. For those of you who are looking to get some work done, whether it's a single or a full album, vinyl, or you're just doing some digital releases, I will put up all the contact information for Noah and Lacquer Channel. I have fully endorse Noah, and I think that his work is great.
Sweet.
And I think that everybody out there who goes that way is making a wise choice.
Awesome.
So thanks for coming on, Noah. It's been really cool chatting with you.
I've been wanting to come on here, so I'm pretty stoked about this. And I'm looking forward to hearing this new song.